Introduce myself. My name is yosina.mkk, NIM 33210097. Dear Madam Lecturer Mamuji Palopi, I am Yosina. Would like to present the result of my test at the end of semester 4 Poetry Appreciation course along with my video. Okay, this is my final project, and the first poem is about Out Out by Robert Frost. The bus saw snarled and rattled in the yard, and made dust and dropped stove-length sticks of wood, sweet scented stuff, when the breeze drove across it, and from there, dust that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain range, one behind the other under the sunset, far into Vermont. And the sow snarled and rattled as it ran light or had to bear a load, and nothing happened. They was all about done. Call it a day. I wish they might have said to please the boy by giving him the half hour that a boy counts so much when saved from work. His sister stood beside him in her apron to tell them supper at the word. The sow, as if it proved so knew what supper meant, leaped out at the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given the hand. However, it was neither refused the meeting but the hand. The boy's first outcry was rueful love as he swung toward them, holding up the hand, half in appeal but half as to keep the life from spilling. Then the boy saw all since he was old enough to know big boy doing a man work. Took a child at heart, he's so old spoiled. Don't let him cut my hand off. The doctor when he comes, don't let him sister. So but the hand was gone already, the doctor put him in the dark of either. He lay and puffed his lips out with his breath, and then the watcher at his pulse took fright, no one believed. They listened at his heart, little less nothing, and did the end. Okay, number one, analyze this poem on the side of intrinsic and extrinsic elements. Number two, elaborate the message from of this poem. Number three, create the poem that contains with the aspect of the followings. Please choose two of them. A. Simile. B. Metaphor. C. Personification. Okay, number one. Analyze this poem on the side of intrinsic and extrinsic element poem. Out by Robert Frost. This summary of the poem Out by Robert Frost tells the story of a boy who works at woodcutter. The setting for this story is before sunset, to be precise in Vermont, where everyone who is there can see beautifully scenery. 5 mountains in a row with a quiet and peaceful atmosphere. That afternoon the boy worked overtime to earn extra money. To meet his living needs, he worked overtime. To earn extra money to make ends meet, he worked overtime half an hour longer than he usually does working. The sound of saws, the smell of wood he meets every day where he works. Okay, number one, analyze this poem on the side of intrinsic and extrinsic poem Out by Robert Frost. A. Intrinsic element. Intrinsic element in poetry that the writer will discuss in this thesis, namely them, tone, style, figurative language, and imagery. Number one, themes. Themes, the main idea or thought that underlines a literary work called Adam Hunter, in his book The Northern Introduction to Literature, 4th edition, states that a poem theme is the statement it makes about its subject, summarizing a paraphrase in one or two sentences, often yields the them, so them in a poem is an explanation of the subject of the poem. We can make a them of poem by making a summary or a paraphrase in one or two sentences. Kennedy added, the themes differ from subject and topics. Main the theme is a sentence that expresses what the meaning of the poem. The subject is broader in scope than the theme. The theme isn't the same as the subject. The main topic, whatever the poem is about. In William Butler Yeats' poem entitled The Lake Island of Innisfree, the subject is the lake isle of Innisfree, but the theme is yearning for an ideal place where the poet will find perfect peace and happiness. Okay, number two is tone. Uh, okay, Number two is tone. Uh, According to parents, in poetry, tone is also important. We have not really understood a poem unless we have accurately sensed whether the attitude it manifests is playful or solemn, mocking or reverent, calm or excited. Based on a parent's statement, we know that the tone in poetry has an important role. Tone is a description of the poet, one of the subjects that the poet tells through the tone. We can know the emotional image of the poet. In the poem, the feline, the first line to the sixth line, tells the joy that happened, while the other lines they speak misfortune or sadness. The sadness is obvious. We look at the last line into a dark and lonely wood. So it can be concluded the tone of the poem is joy and sadness. Okay, number three is language style, figurative language. Poetry is literary work in which many uses figurative language to beautiful poetry. Through the use of figure of speech or figurative language, the poet can describe what he feels and all that is poured in effective piece of writing. There are several styles of language that the author will use in analyze the poem, out by Robert Frost, namely A. Personification. According to Parent, personification consists in giving the attribute of a human being to an animal, an object, or an idea. Based on Parent opinion, the writer argues that through personification language style, poets can animate non-human objects as if they could do the things humans do. Parent opinion above is supported by the opinion of Pradopo, which explained that personification is a figure of speech that equates object with humans in an animate objects are made to act, think, and so on like humans. The following is an example of SI personification. Robert Frost entitled Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening in stanza second lines 5 or 6. Quote from the book Stylistic and the Teaching of Literature. My liter Okay, sorry. Mana tadi number 6? Uh, okay, number 4, imaging imagery. In writing poetry to provide a clear picture and more alive, a top 10 a feeling that the poet uses a lot image of peaceful thinking in the poetry that he poet makes. According to the opinion of the Altern Bern in Pradopo, imagery is an inner picture talk and the language that describe it, while each image of the mind is called image or image. This is opinion is supported by Perrin, namely as follow imagery may be defined as the representation through language of sense experience. Okay, analyze this poem on the side of intrinsic and extrinsic element poem out by Robert Frost. A. Intrinsic element in poetry that the writer will discuss in this thesis, namely them, tone, style, figurative, and imagery. Number 4. Imagery. Auditory imagery. Auditory imagery is an image generated by the sense. Hearing is the ear. The following is an example of auditory imagery from Robert Browning, entitled Meeting at Night. And a voice less loud, through it is joys and fears. Then the two hearts beating at each to each. From the above fragment of the poem, Robert Browning gives sensory imaging experience, namely the ear, to describe how the volume of the conversation going on. Browning implies this with the pares of voice less loud and then the two hearts beating. Readers know that the volume of conversation in the poem is very low and loud, even quieter than the sound of their heartbeats. That matter because they are afraid if the conversation is overheard by other people. B. Visual imagery. Visual imagery is an image generated by sight, namely eyes. Example of visual imagery can be found in fragment of poetry Meeting at Night by Robert Browning as follows: the grey sea and the long black land, and the yellow half moon large and low. Readers will immediately see a picture of how things are secret meeting situation at night. Words like a grey sea, long black land. C. Olfactory imagery. Olfactory imagery is an image generated by smell such as fragrant smell, bad smell, and so forth. An example of a poem expert below. This is still a poem with the same title as the example. Previously Meeting at Night, then a mile of warm sea, scented beach, 3 fields to cross till a farm appears. The above fragment of the poem uses olfactory imagery. Browning implies how the fresh smell of the beach water smells more than one distance away. Smells can be smelled through our sense of smell. Okay, B. Extrinsic element. Number 1. Death. The poem Out by Robert Frost tells of a death experienced by a child due to an accident at work. Here's author will explain matter related to death, including understanding death and the matter relating to the image of death. A. Definition of death. Lapper in them states the death is an of-life process from the opinion expressed. Looper, the author, argues the death is the end of everything what humans can do in the world. When the death comes, man cannot do anything related to life activities. In his book, Dem argues that there are three kinds of understanding of death. The first is the death can be understood as the completion of the dying process or denominated death. Second, death can also be understood as the beginning of dying process, that is a point that is no longer allows the reversal of dying process are called threshold death. Third, death is the loss of organism ability to integrate function her body. Number 2. Elaborate the message from this poem. This summary of the poem Out by Robert Frost tells the story of a boy who works at the woodcutter. The setting for this story is before sunset. To be precise in Vermont, where everyone who is there can see the beautiful scenery. Five mountains in a row with a quiet and peaceful atmosphere. That afternoon the boy worked overtime to earn extra money. To meet his living needs, he worked overtime to earn extra money to make ends meet. He worked overtime half an hour longer than he usually does working. The sound of saws, the smell of wood he meets every day where he works. First, through an analysis of the poem, out the intrinsic element. The most prominent poem is the imagery used by Frost in describing the atmosphere that afternoon at the woodcutter. Through imagery use, the poem becomes more memorable for the reader because as if the reader feels in that place and witness it. Immediately, a tragic accident that happened to the child suddenly and snatched his life. In addition, through style, tone, and depth, Frost also delivered an image that emphasizes that the poem tells an even tragic thing that happens to a child either through the voice of words or emotional portrayal of the poet. Second, through an analysis of extrinsic elements, this poetry by Frost tells about social life in society. The poem Out tells about the sudden death of a child and a chopping block because he was surprised to hear his brother call for dinner. Instantly, the saw he was holding was thrown and fell on in his hand, so that caused death. The situation that was previously calm, peaceful, and beautiful all around, the wood cutting place instantly turned into a gripping state, said, and said, that stops one time and life activities altogether. Abandon a person. That does bring sorrow and suffering, but no one can escape it. Everyone sometimes will face it, whether today, tomorrow, in the next few hours. For people left behind, they must believe in themselves that that is a natural thing that should happen, and they should return to their activities like usually. Okay, number three, create the poem that contains with the aspect of the followings. Please choose two of them. A. Simile. B. Metaphor. C. Personification. Uh, my poem is The Breather. The title is The Breather. Okay, I reading. In her room at the prow of the house, where the light breaks and the windows are tossed with linden, my doctor is writing a story. I paused in the stairwell, hearing from her shut door a commotion of typewriters' keys like a chains hauled over a gunwale. Young as she is, the stuff of her life is a great cargo and some of it heavy. I wish her a lucky passage, but now it is she who pauses as if the reject my talk and its easy figure. A stillness greeted in which the whole house seemed to be thinking, and then she is it again with bunched clamor of truth and again is silent. I remember the day startling which was trapped in the fairy room 2 years ago, how we stole in lifted a sash and retreated to afraid it, and how for helpless hour through the crack of the door we watched the sleek, wild, dark, and iridescent creature better against the brilliance drop like a glove to the hard floor or the desktop, and wet then hum and bloody. For the wits to try it again, and how our spirit rose when suddenly sure it lifted off from a chair back, beating a smooth course for the right window and clearing the still of the ward. It is always a matter, my darling, of life or death. As I had forgotten, I wish what I wish you before, but harder. The simile, the poet compares the sound of typewriter keys to a chain hauled over a gunwale on a ship. This developed the metaphor between the house and ship even further. The lifting of the anchor by the chain allows the ship to move forward freely as overcoming rudder block allows the doctor to move forward in her writing. The tenor is startling is compared bicycle glove, which drops to the hard floor. The image of the dropping glove enhances our perception of the battery startling dropping to the ground after hitting the window. The solid thump is more easily heard through the simile and the feelings of defeat are felt. Personification. The house is personified as quiet, reflective, and pensive. This allows the reader to imagine that because the father and daughter are also lost in thought, it seems as though the house is lost in thought as well. Okay, thank you. This is my final text project assignment, poetry appreciation.